is, of course, a member of that Senate Finance Committee. Welcome back to Bloomberg. It's good to have you here, Senator. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
Oh, so let's start with the whip count. I mean, we're all become sort of amateur experts in this, as it were. You've got a fairly narrow margin. You've got 52 Republican votes in the Senate. You perhaps lost one yesterday in Senator Johnson of Wisconsin. We are told that he's a pretty firm no. Is that your sense of it?
You know, I don't know. You'd have to talk to Senator Johnson. He has some concerns about how we're dealing with the pass-through companies. I would make the obvious point that the pass-throughs, which is about half of the employees in America, are employed by companies that are taxed at the individual level, smaller businesses, LLCs, and so on. But those companies do get a substantial tax break in this legislation to encourage more investment in jobs. So it is actually something that the National Federation of Independent Businesses yesterday endorsed strongly, our legislation. So I do think it helps in terms of the economy generally. We've talked about this before. It makes our companies competitive globally, which makes our workers competitive globally. It provides considerable middle-class tax relief, which Democrats and Republicans alike are saying they are for. So I think it's a very good bill, and I think we'll get it out of committee and then onto the floor. And at the end of the day, I think we'll get it passed.
So you're fairly confident that you'll have the votes necessary, which is really 50 plus the vice president. You're pretty confident in that number at this point.
David, I am, and I think we should not discount the fact that a lot of Democrats are going to be interested as well, because if we can stick to the basic formula here, which is to provide real middle-class tax relief. For instance, in my home state of Ohio, the family income, which is the median family income, would get about a $2,375, almost $2,400 tax break just based on the legislation we already have before us. Some changes are being made to it to actually increase that amount. So it's a substantial tax break for people who are struggling right now, paycheck to paycheck. And it also provides for a real shot in the arm to the economy because of this 20% rate in territorial, which is something that on a bipartisan basis we've been promoting for a long time to try to be sure American workers aren't competing with one hand tied behind their back.
Senator Portman, let's talk about those Democrats that you refer to, because overnight there's some Bloomberg reporting about something that I'm not sure I knew about, which is the pay-as-you-go legislation that basically says in each given year, if you reduce revenues or you increase costs, you're going to have to match it. That might trigger automatic cuts that haven't been anticipated. Does that require you to go to the Democrats and get a waiver of that as a practical matter?
Well, we would, if we have the votes for the bill, we'll have the votes for the waiver, which is done routinely, as you know, and has been in the past by Democrats and Republicans alike. So I don't think that ends up being an issue. I think the issue is, you know, whether Democrats believe that this tax relief is going to be good for their constituents. And I think as they look at it, and I'm not suggesting, David, that there'll be a lot of Democrats, but I think there are several who I've talked to who are expressing interest. You know, they are Democrats who, in the past, have talked about the need for middle-class tax cuts and to make our workers more competitive, and that's basically what this legislation does.
When the Senate inserted a repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate, didn't that make it an awful lot more difficult to get any Democrats to come along? Certainly the Democrats rose up in arms and complained about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's the individual mandate is not popular out there. If you look at the polling on this, people don't think there ought to be a tax or a penalty if they choose not to elect the Affordable Care Act insurance. For these people, for the most part, they can't afford it. In my own state, 84% of those people who are currently penalized under the individual mandate have family incomes of less than $50,000 a year. So it tends to be a regressive penalty or tax, as the Supreme Court has said. It's also part of the International Revenue Code, so it fits with a tax reform bill. So, you know, it depends which Democrats you're talking about, but I do think that this is one where we're providing relief to some people who otherwise would be getting a tax. And then, because of the tax relief proposal, we're also giving tax relief there. So for many of these families, it's double tax relief.
And finally, Senator Portman, when you talk about relief, what about relief on the estate tax? And over on the House side, we have a $10,000. You can deduct the estate tax, real estate taxes up to $10,000. The Senate had been saying, no, we're going to repeal them altogether. Now we're hearing maybe the Senate will come toward the House, because we had Chairman Brady of the House Ways and Means Committee say he could not go along with legislation that didn't include that $10,000 real estate deduction.
Yeah, I think as a practical matter, David, that's probably where this ends up. I'm not, you know, making a prediction here that, you know, is anything other than the fact that the House, you know, needed to have that $10,000 deduction for property taxes. So I would think to get the votes, probably we need to do that again. And, you know, I think also when you look at how that would work in terms of the tax code, because it's capped at $10,000, it would help a lot of middle-class families.
Okay, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I know you're
Thanks,
very
David.
busy.
Always good.